doctors like were taking computer science. They were taking.
Well, we might have a few more people come in, but I think we can get started. So welcome everyone to the 2019 ISP presentation. ISP stands for Independent Senior Project. We have 4 wonderful presentations for us today, and without further ado, Opal is going to kick us off. So.
So my experience at St. Mary's Hospital. So what did I do for my ISP? For my ISP, I decided to volunteer at St. Mary's Hospital. At the hospital, I learned all about their emergency department, patient care, nurse dynamics, and the 3rd floor, which is where I spent most of my time. My time at St. Mary's started with an orientation where I learned the basic rules of being a volunteer, such as how to interact with patients when necessary and about HIPAA laws, which are privacy laws. I was not able to start at the hospital right away because they had to ensure that I did not have TB or have ever been exposed to it. So all of us have had this test in order to attend Westover. It's the PPD TB skin test, and I had to go with a parent to get it done because they kept insisting upon that since I'm not 18. But I was unable to bring a parent because I live an hour away, and that's kind of a long trip just for one test that could take up the whole day for my mom. So I had to work with the health center to be able to get there without a parent, and that took a little bit of time. So before the hospital, I decided to research about implicit bias. I learned about implicit bias at hospitals and how Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to experience a pregnancy-related death than white women. This is because Black women are more likely to develop complications and develop them at different times in their pregnancy than white women. Other implicit biases that I learned about were from the patient side. Patients are more likely to appreciate a male doctor with good bedside manner than a woman doctor with bedside manner because it is expected that women be motherly and polite, while it's seen as an excellent quality for their male counterparts. So finally, I was able to start at the hospital, and I started in the emergency department. So what did I do in the emergency department? I did not enjoy working there. It was a very tiring experience, and it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be. So I would stock the phlebotomy carts, which meant bringing 7 of these carts where the wheels barely work sometimes to their stock room, which they call their 911 room, and stocking them. I was also responsible for cleaning out the linen out of rooms after patients had been discharged. Another one of my responsibilities was to stock the blanket warmer. All of this left no time for me to truly observe patients and their care. But looking back now, I realized that all of my work in the ED taught me a bit about how the department ran. The nurses seemed to be understaffed, with each of them constantly running around and never truly having any downtime to really work on their charts and other things if they weren't eating. Restocking the carts taught me a lot about what they used in the emergency department. They always needed IV start kits. They always needed a variety of different types of needles, a variety of tubes for blood tests, urine cups for urine samples and stuff like that, and saline. The blanket warmer was almost always empty, which taught me about how many blankets they went through. There were more patients than rooms, which led to patients being parked in hallways until a room was available, and a long wait for those who did not arrive in an ambulance. A majority of the patients in the emergency department were elderly people. A lot of people required x-rays and EKGs. An EKG is an electrocardiogram, which is a machine that reads your heartbeat through various wires that are stuck to your body. This test is used to detect abnormalities in your heart's rhythm. After spending a few days in the emergency department and realizing that it really wasn't the best place for my project and I asked to be moved. My new assignment was the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor consisted of quite a few different types of patients, such as dialysis and oncology patients, and patients with infectious bacteria, and a variety of other patients from the emergency department. On my first day on the 3rd floor, I learned all about how it ran. I learned what the different notation on the charts meant. The notations consisted of different types of colored labels to indicate if a patient was a surgical patient, which was indicated by a red label, a teaching patient, which meant that the patient was used to teach interns, which were blue labels, and if the patient had a hospitalist, which meant that their doctor was a doctor from inside the hospital, which was indicated by a yellow sticker with an H on it. I also learned about the different types of people at the nurses station. There were RNs, or registered nurses, nurse aides, a nurse leader, doctors who came to check the charts of patients, social workers who were also there to check charts, and lastly, one of the most important people, the clerical, who was in charge of making sure that all of the discharges were complete. They answered the calls, printed the tickets to ride. What a ticket to ride is the hospital system to ensure that all the people on the patient's case are aware of the patient being brought to a different department for a test. This could include radiology, CT, and other tests that cannot be done in the patient room. So this is their temporary nurses station. Right now, they're renovating the nurses station to include a new med station, which I'll talk about later. So it's a little crowded. It's actually moved into a patient room. So this is not how it usually looks. They wanted me to stress that. Okay. So, sorry, that's my spot. So the nurse leader is not. So the nurse leader is someone who is in charge of all the nurses. She's not in the nurses station often because she has an office where she takes calls from corporate about the department, and she has meetings with corporate to ensure that they know what the department needs. Social workers who pop in to look at charts are assigned to cases when someone needs an advocate. They could be assigned to a patient who has been evaluated by the psychology department to ensure that the decisions are being made in the patient's best interest. The clerical is always in the nurse's station, and she's checking the computer and filling out discharge papers in the discharge board. After learning about the people in the nurse's station, I noticed the different types of boards that were up. You can't really see the one that's like this way, but that's the discharge board, and that's just patients who have bed alarms because they're not supposed to really get out of bed on their own. So the board, or you can't see in this picture, is the board that has the record of days since the last fall, the current number of days since the record number of days since the last fall, the current number of days since the last fall, and how many Foleys there are on the floor. A Foley is a catheter that is often used for patients who are unable to go to the bathroom. So the standing number for the record of number of days between falls is 213. This number is impressive because a lot of patients are fall risk and they don't realize that they're fall risk, and they think they can go to the bathroom on their own without a nurse aide helping them. So, and also the discharge board was often behind because patients often leave against medical advice and don't tell their doctors that they're leaving. So, what are specific examples of cases on the third floor? So in addition to learning about the cases, I also have the responsibility of answering the call box at the nurse's station and page the appropriate person. If the if the IV machine was beeping, I would call the RN. If there was something like needing to go to the bathroom or needing water, I would call the nurse aide. The call button was next to the clerical seat, so I was able to observe the computer screen and learn all about the patients on the floor. I learned that on my first day there was that the floor had 3 patients with infectious bacteria. So this included a 64-year-old who had MRSA. MRSA stands for methicillin-resistant staphylococcus. It's the staph infection. This is a staph infection that is resistant to many commonly used antibiotics. There was a 72-year-old who had MDRO. MDRO stands for multi-drug-resistant organisms. I got that one. This is the common bacteria that has developed a resistance to multiple types of antibiotics. And then there was also an 83-year-old patient with C. diff. C. diff is short for Clostridium difficile colitis. This is a bacterium that causes diarrhea and colitis, which is an inflammation of the colon. On my first day there, the lab kept calling to let one of the nurses know about the results of one of her patients. The nurse was busy with the MRSA patient and was unable to answer the call. The lab insisted that it was important, and eventually one of the other nurses had to assume the responsibility for her. The result was that one of the patients had tested positive for E. coli that was resistant to a few different types of antibiotics. This meant that the floor now had another MDRO patient on their hands. Some other cases that the floor has seen includes hiatal hernia with intractable vomiting. A hiatal hernia is a condition that occurs when a part of the stomach pushes through the diaphragm muscle, and intractable vomiting is just vomiting that cannot be controlled. Pneumonia in a 103-year-old, which was abbreviated as PNA in the nursing chart. Acute sickle cell crisis, which is an abnormality. Okay, sickle cell disease is a group of inherited red blood cells. People who have sickle cell disease have an abnormal protein in their blood cells. And then, sorry, I keep losing my spot. And hyperkalemia. So hyperkalemia is when the level of potassium in the blood is above the normal level. The floor has had other cases of MRSA come and go, and one of the MRSA patients was sent to radiology because they had to consider the possibility of cutting off their leg because of their MRSA infection. So, in between observing the clerical's work, listening to the nurses talk about their patients, and answering the call box, I was able to ask nurses, nurse aides, and the clerical what they thought about St. Mary's joining Trinity Health in 2016. I immediately learned that all of the nurses and the clerical had been there before the hospital joined and have seen and felt the repercussions. The most common answer is that Trinity has turned the hospital into a corporation instead of the family that they used to be. Trinity has caused the hospital to only care about money. It's harder for the nurses to request things because it has to go through corporate and it takes a really long time. The nurses talked about how they used to enjoy working and how they could rely on each other to help out, but now under the new Trinity rules, they're no longer allowed to have that freedom, and now are always charting. Charting is the #1 thing that nurses have to do, and before Trinity, they could all sit down and write their charts, and as one employee put it, have some actual time to use social skills. This has caused nurses to be glued to their computer and never having any time to de-stress. Working together with charting allowed nurses to spend more time with their patients, but now that they have to use their badges to get into patient files, they are unable to split the work and therefore do not have as much time for their patients. A new thing that Trinity is bringing to their corporation of hospitals is a new med station that all the nurses and nurse aides are dreading. It's called Pyxis. So Pyxis is going to make the already arduous job of being a nurse even more tedious. The Pyxis system will require the fingerprint of the nurse giving the medication when rounding. This system would again restrict the amount of working together that nurses and nurse aides are able to do, even more than it is currently restricted. Also, the system is extremely exasperating. It requires that nurses get the meds for each individual patient one at a time. This means that they have to get the medication for one patient and go all the way to the patient room, even if it's like all the way at the end of the at the other end of the floor, administer the medication, and go back to get the next patient's medication. Although this is to ensure safety in the administration of medicine, it is time-consuming. Even though the nurses are constantly worrying about charting, they still find time to provide excellent patient care. They genuinely care about the people under their care, and they do their best to meet every need and ensure that patients are comfortable. Everyone at St. Mary's is so kind and ready to help, which is exactly how the healthcare facility should be. The RNs, aides, and the clerical all have an interesting dynamic. It sort of reminds me of like the typical high school student dynamic with a mature spin. So when someone they do not like, or if they think the person is lazy is not around, they will comment on it to each other. But as soon as that person is around, they all talk with the person and agree with their complaints, only to complain to one another when that person is gone. But however, they do not let their drama get in the way of their work, which is where the sense of maturity comes from. All the nurses absolutely hate it when someone is lazy. The nurses seem to like people who get their work done, don't complain, and aren't arrogant. Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Heather for being my ISP advisor. Dawn, my advisor, for listening to all my problems after a long day. And Shelby for allowing me to conduct this project, and Melissa for driving me every time I had to go. Questions?
So do you want to be a nurse?
I was just
I really want to be a pediatric surgeon, but I thought this was a really great way to get into the hospital environment. Any questions?
Elizabeth is up next. Figure that out.
It's just on the screen.
So this term I focused on creating a habitat for solitary bee species. After an exciting week doing an environmental science internship at the Knock Institute, I knew that I wanted to do an ISP with something of the same nature as the projects that I had seen at Knock. So after rolling out studying microplastics, because it would be difficult to get to a variety of water sources, I decided to focus on pollinators. Initially, I planned on studying the variety of pollinators that we have on campus, but because the pollinators don't show up until a few weeks into spring term, the data collection would not have worked very well. That's when Heather introduced the idea of making houses for solitary bee species, which to me was perfect because 1, I love nature, 2, I love bees and I think they're incredibly fascinating, and 3, I love building things. So what are solitary bees? Unlike social bees, such as honeybees that live in hives, solitary bees live alone. Ground-dwelling solitary bees live in the ground, while other solitary bees live in small holes found in their surrounding environment, such as small holes in trees, buildings, or other structures, such as Ian's work table in the tech shop. While there are more than 4,000 solitary bee species in North America, mason bees are the most prevalent, with over 140 species of mason bees alone. Mason bees, like other solitary bee species, are good to attract because they rarely sting. Because the bees do not have a hive or territory to protect, they do not often have cause to sting. In fact, male mason bees do not have a stinger, and the females will only sting if they are trapped or squeezed. Besides living in small holes, solitary bees will also place their larvae in chambers that they create in these small holes. The bees will pack in mud, chew leaves, and other organic matter, deposit an egg, and then create another mud layer in a cycle until the hole is full, and they will seal off the opening of the tube with the newborn bees, which the newborn bees will break through the following spring after they hatch. So you can see an example of that there. So the mud and the cracked leaves are like the kind of things between them, and then these young bees will often return to the same location, but not necessarily the same hole, for generations. So creating a habitat for solitary bee species ensures protection and habitat space for years to come. But why is it so important to protect this vital group of pollinators? Pollinators in general are not as abundant as they should be, and it is easier to create a habitat for solitary bees who are in need of homes than it is to install entire hives. These are excellent pollinators and are important because they ensure the continued health of nearby flower species, which in turn helps the surrounding ecosystem to function as they should. In fact, mason bees are believed to actually pollinate more efficiently than honeybees, and so these benefits are increased. So how do we help these little guys? By creating habitats for them. In order to create an optimal habitat, solitary bees require several factors. To start, the holes in which they take shelter should be 2 millimeters to 10 millimeters in size for mason bees. Larger holes would encourage parasites or predation and should be avoided. The hole should also be closed at one end, and the open end should face east because the bees need the first beams of sunlight to warm up and get going in the mornings. The house should be at least 1 meter off the ground to prevent predation, and clay soil must be available within 50 to 100 feet of the house for the pollinators to use when packing in egg chambers or sealing off the end of an egg chamber. The house should be monitored and cleaned out every 2 years to invite the next generations of bees and avoid parasites and fungus. The structure should be able to deflect rain, as the holes and their openings must be kept dry, and the materials should be breathable, such as wood, so that it does not hold on to moisture like plastic or glass would. The materials must be odorless and unburnished so as to attract the bees, and the entrances need to be smooth enough to not damage their fragile wings. So to build my bee houses, which you can see in the corner right over here, I took in all these considerations and decided on wood structures with some natural material tubes to fill in the structure. The wood comes from the Westover's hemlock trees that were cut down last summer, as well as some other recycled scrap wood and cardboard tubes that are designed for mason bee habitats were ordered to fill in the spaces between the wood. And you can see, like, those are the dimensions of those 2 boxes right there. And I've decided to wait to put up the bee houses for 2 reasons. Firstly, the ideal time to set up the bee habitats is the beginning of the season, which would have been closer to the beginning of the term. So it would not make sense to set up the houses now when it is unlikely that it will be inhabitable until next year. Also, because there will be a renovation of the community garden area, that would be a prime time to place the houses, as it will receive ample sunlight and it'll have many flowering plants in the surrounding area. So I'm hoping that you will get to see these in action next year. Yeah, so I have made also a structure and kind of suggestions of how to upkeep these bee houses. So in the fall, every fall, they need to be collected because the bee larvae are going to be in the holes and they shouldn't stay out all winter. So you'll want to collect the tubes from inside the holes as well as the blocks of wood, and then you'll keep them inside. You can actually wash the larvae out if needed with like tepid water, if there is like parasites and such, and then you'll let everything air dry on a paper towel before placing it into a breathable container and storing it in a cool and dry environment, such as a refrigerator for the summer or for the winter weather. And then in the spring, usually you want to put about a third of the cocoons out every 2 weeks to prolong the pollination season. And the collected mason bee tubes and containers should be placed upside down or like under an upside down bucket with a hole cut in the side, and the bees, when they hatch, will go towards the light and then eventually find their way out. And then also the materials inside the box, so the blocks of wood and the tubes, should be replaced every 2 years because it does get kind of gross in there and bees won't want to inhabit it. So yeah. Oh, and I want to give a thanks to Heather and for helping me to figure out how I wanted to go about making a bee house, for guiding me through the term and keeping me on track, and for always being available to lend an idea or a drill bit, and for being awesome. And I want to thank Jeff for so kindly cutting the wood pieces right down to size, and Ian for helping me with all the technicalities of building and lending spare wood. And I also want to thank my friends for being willing to work in the physics room so that I can drill without being alone.
So, I guess the bees are solitary, but not that solitary, so they're like happy to be near
Yeah,
each
because they
other.
each have their own hole, but they don't socialize with each other, so they don't have like bee dances.
But they don't bother.
But they don't bother each other.
How many of these do we need on campus to sustain a?
It depends on how many bees we have. I know there's quite a few in Ian's work table. Like if the thing, they all come out.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
It was weird. You came and like you started talking to me about these bees. I was like, oh, okay, sure, I'll help you. And then sure enough, I started sitting at my work table. I was just like, bees are coming in and out. I was like, oh, look at that.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be.
So yeah, I'm really not too sure. I would say like if the two are well inhabited, then maybe add more. If it seems that they're not like entirely inhabited, then maybe 2 is good.
Thank you.
Slideshow. Or that up too. No, that's okay. No, that's all good. Now I gotta figure out how this thing works. What is this? Do guys. Oh.
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Just the air.
Oh, it keeps going.
Just the 2 arrows. Back.
No, this is good.
They work?
I don't know technology. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I did mine on stained glass, and you may wonder why. It's a good question. Because in my old school we had stained glass, and I did it because I wasn't artsy and I wanted something to get out of art. But then I loved it, and yeah, so I made this in 7th grade. This is sushi, kind of look like drums. This is a guitar. I made that in 8th grade. And then this this is a replica of Big Sky, Montana, which is my favorite ski mountain. And I actually started it in my freshman year, but I didn't finish it until this year. So I finished it here. Yeah, that's why I ended up doing this ISP because I finished that really early. So. Oh, that's the wrong one. Okay. So I did a lot of research, and from my research I found that through a historical view of the processes of stained glass window making, which include light, geometry, and coloration, and an understanding of the divine order and the soul's journey through the ideas of geometry in the rose window, I designed a window that responds to the ideas of self-love and my personal journey. Okay, so just about the technique. I first looked into the way that light interacts with stained glass. So in traditional studio art, with paintings and such, you're really just using reflected light rather than transmitted light. But in stained glass, it's one of the only art mediums that uses transmitted light. So one of the things that's really important is the idea of halation, which if you're not familiar with, halation is the phenomenon where a projected light from a paler glass is projected into a ring that overpowers the light from darker glass. So cold colors such as blue have positive halations, whereas warmer colors such as ruby and red have negative halations. So as a result, the blue positive halation will overpower the red. In addition, okay. Oh, that got cut off. Okay. Well, anyways, it says light in terms of location. And so another thing that's really important for light is the location of the window, especially if it's in a building. So this is a window. This is the Notre Dame window before it got burned down. It's the western window, and Roland Lecomte was the creator of this piece, and he intentionally put it in onto the west side because he wanted the sunset light to be portrayed within the window, and also the light that shines down, just like the way that he made it was intentional with the way that the sun moves. So placement is also super important for stained glass. All right, okay. So the second thing that I looked into was geometry of the stained glass. So one of the really important things that you wouldn't really think about is the seams in between the pieces of glass. If they're thicker seams, it's more of a dominant portrayal of the stained glass, or a more dominant feel to it, whereas the thinner seams have more of a cool and also just more of a calm sense. So when you look at this one, I mean, it's just more dominant and more in your face. And then there's this one that's kind of more calm. So yeah, the artists work to find the correct seam width for their intentions. Nope, that needs to click wrong. Okay. Wait, we got cut off too in the screen. Okay, well this is geometry also. Okay, so the second thing about geometry is a technique called tracery, which is also about the shapes that are made. So a lot of the times in big arches, they're separated into two with different specific either wood or the metal on the inside. So obviously, as you can see, this window is also the Notre Dame window before it was burned down. It's a common theme. These lines here are intentionally placed to separate and trace, that's the word tracery, the shape of the intended window that they're trying to create. So that's not big. Okay. So my other investigation was in coloration, but I really looked into the opalescent era from 1880 to 1920, which was an era where stained glass really morphed in our country. So one of the first things that happened during this era is we saw a lot less of figural stained glass and more of depictions of nature in 2D ways. So a lot of incorporation of 2D geometric bands with eccentric colors to make the designs of the floral shape that you see here. In addition, a lot of the more traditional stained glass used transparent glass, whereas this era we saw a lot of opaque glass being used, which combines both reflection and transmission of the light, so that has a different look to it. So the window that you see here, as you can tell, it has more opaque glass. All this glass is opaque, and also these are flowers instead of religious gods and stuff like that. And so one of the major artists in the opalescent era was a man by the name of John Lafarge, and he went to England at the beginning of his career, so about 1840s, and was super dissatisfied with the stained glass there. He thought it was really bad, and so he came back to the United States and was just determined to make stained glass prettier. And he described stained glass as, quote, painting in air with material carrying colored light. So he was a painter. He wasn't a stained glass artist, so he only painted the designs and then had technicians put it together. So he kind of is the artist. I don't really know. But what he's known for is his style of plating, which was a technique to make more vibrant colors by putting one glass upon another. So if you're an artist anyway, obviously like red and yellow makes orange, so he did that with glass, like putting them on top of each other instead of mixing it to make different colors or different, obviously it doesn't have to be like combinations, it could have been, anyways, yeah, lots of options. And so he described this as, quote, this involved glass not painted on but very much of complementary colors, through which complementary colors, the shadows and halftones and modeling of the figure and background were obtained. So he was really interested in making more beautiful art, as I said, making more vibrant colors, and that was something that really interested me. Oh, keep doing it. Okay, so my design, I wanted wanted to make a window based off of my investigations. As you guys can see, all I've ever made are 3D designs, and I kind of wanted not to do that for the first time and really try to make something more traditional. So I found a traditional rose window online, but in Westover style, I put the Westover Tudor rose on it, which I'll just describe later its meaning, but that was the design by which I made my piece. So my coloration, I decided to do a lot off of my research. The first thing that I did was have a variation of ruby tones and blue tones, so a variation of warm and cold, to show the differences in halation. So if you see here, these are all blue, these are all red, these are all blue. I don't know why. If you see in the piece, these are red. So, you know, lots of blues and red to investigate the differences between halations. In addition, I also gradually have the glass get lighter as it goes toward the inside. So this is dark and then it got lighter, and then eventually in the center it's completely clear. So looking at different shades of glass. And finally, I also varied the opaqueness of glass. So I had opaque and I also had transparent. So all of this is opaque. These are opaque. These are opaque, which you'll see in the real one. Okay, so my geometry, I combined a lot of what I researched to incorporate all of that. So first thing, this is my window. This is what I made. I did it so that it's symmetrical, which is a very common theme in rose windows. So if you don't know what symmetrical is, it's on both sides. Second thing that I did was vary the seam width. So if you see here, the seams are particularly dense, whereas the seams in here are particularly small. So I wanted to see how that would affect the dominance of the piece and the way that it looked. And so I kind of incorporate all the things that I investigated in my research. Oopsies. I don't understand why everything's being covered, but okay. So what is the meaning of light? So I looked into the Gothic era and for the meaning of light and looked into a term called lux nova, which is the transformation of colored light from natural light to spiritual light. So in particular, a lot of the light that is transmitted through windows in churches represents the realm of God's control over the people that he has his power and has the lights on. So again, this is the Notre Dame window, same one, just different picture. And so the way that the light shone would have that effect of who God has his control over. And also in addition, the way that the pieces are made also serves to accentuate certain parts of the piece. So when you look at it, your eye, like for me at least, my eyes go to these little dots, this thing, these dots. And if you look really closely, all those dots have people in them, have specific religious figures. So the way that they make the light reflect and have more blue tones, so if you see there's a lot of blue tones in here, so that the halation will make it more vibrant and make your eyes go to it. So that's why the circles, they have a lot of blue tones and it makes your eyes go. Okay, so geometry is meaning that incorporates divine order, love, and the soul's journey. So the geometry of a window represents the wholesome and completeness of the universe in a more religious sense, showing that the perfection, imperfections, and the wholeness of the universe as one with all the shapes, all the imperfections, all the perfections, etc. And in addition, the stained glass world represents a combining of the engineering of windows as well as the theology behind them, so representing both structure and the meaning of one's life combining into one. Okay, so rose windows were the accumulation of my study. Kind of everything came into that. So roses in particular are a symbol of love and beauty as established in classical worlds. I read this book called Rose Windows by Peyton Cohen, which a lot of quotations are going to be from there, so just bear with me. So he describes roses as, quote, the rose becomes symbolic of human love and divine love, of passionate love, but also love beyond passion. The rose represents one's path both spiritually and secularly through their lives. Cohen also writes, quote, but the path of faith union is inherent in the rose alone, a symbol a symbol of simple acceptance of God's love for the world. So through those sort of ideas, it shows the divine love that one feels, and just kind of like that, the love that one expresses for oneself, but also the love for God and that, historically. In addition, rose windows also serve to represent a moment or a time to step back from your day-to-day and consider and reflect on the path of your soul. So Cohen also writes, quote, "The sheer size and strength of form of the greatest of them cannot fail to hold the attention and provoke a moment's reflection and wonder." And the final destination is the final journey that one takes. So in a religious sense, the rose window tends to represent the last judgment. So when your soul is defined either as good or bad. But first it also represents just the path and the journey that your soul and you take throughout your life. So Cohen writes, quote, "The petals of the rose symbolize an unfolding mandala or labyrinth along whose path the journey is made." And along with the religious point, he writes that, quote, "The rose window superimposed on this labyrinth suggests the mandala, the viewfinder of meaning, protected onto life as a means not only of finding one's way, but also differentiating between the forces of good and evil." So as you can see, there are a lot of winding paths on this rose, but everything tends to lead to the center, which is the destination, which is the last judgment, the decision of your soul. So even if it kind of winds, everything eventually leads to the center, which is the purpose of bringing and representing the last judgment. Okay, yeah, that's me. So for me, my journey in life has been one of self-discovery and self-acceptance. I came to Westover in 11th grade from a structured therapeutic boarding school, and I was super overwhelmed by the freedom, but also burdens of academic intensity, and also just personal expectations of success. Hard to imagine, but I was pretty quiet when I first came. Not really the way it is now, but I was super, super quiet and didn't really want to talk to anybody. But I gradually opened up to the community, who eventually opened their arms and welcomed me in. Just an example would be last year I took a drawing class just for credit and fell in love and ended up winning some awards for my art for the end of the year, which would never have happened at my old school because I would never have done that because I just wouldn't have done it. So in terms of my piece, I tried to incorporate everything, but from the research to Westover to everything. So first, I should hold it up. So first I combined both cool colors and warm colors to vary the halation. And just in terms of my life meaning, that really served to represent the highs and lows of my life. So both like the positive halation and the negative halation are all a part of who I am and a part of my journey. Nothing is to be left out. And so the positive and negative halation serve to represent the varying experiences that I had on my journey, I guess. In addition, as I explained before, the glass goes from dark to light on the inside, which honestly to me represented the winding and difficult road that I went on to get where I am today, but it's also just a depiction of how is lightness within the dark, and that there is always something good within the seemingly bad. In addition to that, with the layering of the opacity of the glass, I also wanted to show that, again, that there's always light within the dark, and so even if the light may not be reflected or transmitted here, there's always another place where it can be. So it's kind of another meaning. Finally, just as in a traditional rose window, the winding seams represent my winding journey of my time at Westover with highs and lows, but all the seams eventually lead to the center of the piece. Just how all the roads of my journey led to the success and happiness that I found. My rose window represents my life's journey and my path to discovering my true soul. The intentional seams and structure of my window serve to represent my search for a balanced life and life between structure and meaning. As my time at Westover comes to a close, I look at this piece as a reminder that there will always be, that although the seams of my life may be winding at times, they will always end up at the destination at which I'm meant to arrive. So, just a general idea of the process of stained glass. Cutting, and you grind it to the proper shape, then you foil it with adhesive copper, and then you stick it together with solder. And in my last meeting with Allie, she asked me the hardest part, and I will mention that I found that soldering was the hardest part because getting these seams to be splat and curved is very difficult. I breathed in way too much smoke in the process. So, and yeah, and just a big thank you to Allie for being everything and like helping me out with every step of the way. I mean, she didn't know anything about stained glass, but like the research and stuff. So, yeah. Any questions?
What are you going to do with your final piece?
Yeah, we don't know yet. I'm trying to figure it out. I mean, I kind of don't really care. But the original intention was to give it to the school. So Allie and I were talking about it this morning, but that would also mean that I'd have to take all my stained glass stuff out of the bag that I packed and like rehang and put like little like hanger things on them, which doesn't take very much time, but I packed on my bag. So I don't really want to unpack it.
How long was the whole creation process?
Sorry, say that again?
How long was the whole creation process?
Oh, it's very long. This window didn't take nearly as long as the stuff that I showed in the beginning, but I'd say like close to 24 hours in total, maybe more. Once my APs were over, I was in the studio about 4 hours a day because I was very behind. So, yeah, it was a lot of work, but yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
Did you ever have a chance to travel to Paris to see?
Yes, I did. I was
What was that
a lot
experience for you? Do
I
you
really
recall?
don't remember.
Yeah.
I was 15, and to be honest with you, I wasn't so pleased about being in Paris because I was supposed to go skiing, and then I broke my back, so that didn't really work out, and so I wasn't really pleased to be there. So I don't really remember a lot about Paris, so it's too bad. Also, that's like before I was really passionate about stained glass. I sort of did it for credit. So maybe one day when it's like back and up and running and whatnot, but yeah, no, at the time I really didn't care. I wanted to be skiing.
That's so interesting.
So.
Good, thank you. And last, but certainly not least.
This is really tall, so I'm gonna like try to step to the side and look at it every now and then. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Atulia Nas, and today I'm going to be presenting to you about race-based admissions, or more specifically, Asian Americans and their role in affirmative action. I was initially inspired by this project when I was granted the opportunity to go to SDLC this past December in Nashville. And during that time, they presented affinity groups. So basically, you go to the group in which you identify with, mainly based off of race. And when I was there, they briefly mentioned the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard case. And I didn't go to that group because I went to another one, but I kind of remembered it because it was interesting because it has to do with the court case and I'm kind of interested in that kind of stuff. And then when I came back, I looked into it and I realized this is pretty cool. So, just as a brief background, what is affirmative action? At face value, it was initially created as a way to right wrongs from the past, so fixing injustices. But now it's kind of used as a tool to promote diversity and inclusion. Just to provide a basic example, let's say for instance, there are two candidates for admission into a college. One of them is a white male and the other is a female of an underrepresented minority. They would say that the underrepresented minority deserves that chance over the white male and that she has certain identifiers that have been historically oppressed, and therefore she deserves that chance to basically right certain wrongs, and she'll add a different perspective into the educational institution. So, the actual case. It was filed under the official name of Students for Fair Admissions versus the President and Fellows of Harvard College. It was filed November 17, 2014 in the District Court of Massachusetts in the Boston Division. Now, it's not quite there yet, but they're saying that it's projected to reach the Supreme Court. In the filing, they say that Harvard is being accused for discrimination based on race and ethnicity. They're claiming that they are trying to achieve this idea of critical mass through racial balancing. A couple terms that I'm going to explain. Critical mass is this idea that a person of a specific ethnicity shouldn't walk onto a campus and feel as though they are the sole representation of their entire ethnicity, that there are other people who share the same identity. Racial balancing is this idea that regardless of the volume of applicants of a certain ethnicity, the percentage of that ethnicity does not change. So they're claiming that the number of Asian applicants to Harvard has increased over the years, but the percentage of Asian students within Harvard has stayed the same. The problem is that Harvard accepts federal funding. That means that they also have to pass federal mandates by just the government, and they're saying that racially balancing an institution is unconstitutional, and therefore they should stop. But this is where it gets kind of interesting, because the SFFA pivots from the narrative of Asian Americans and says that the point and the issue is that there's a tip that's given to Latino and African American students, and their idea is that to get rid of that tip or just affirmative action in all. So, I find a couple problems with this case. First off, the person who is representing the Students for Fair Admissions. His name is Edward Bloom. He is a conservative lawyer, and he's also labeled as a civil rights activist if you Google him. He's had cases where he basically just finds plaintiffs to represent in a way to take down affirmative action. He was he represented Fisher in the UT versus Fisher case recently, and that case didn't work through. And one of the judges had mentioned that maybe it would be a little different if he had found an Asian plaintiff. So he basically set out a search saying, were you rejected from Harvard? Were you rejected from UNC Chapel Hill? Sign up for my this platform and this group. And they made Students for Fair Admissions. So they have a couple cases going on. There's Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill. But Harvard is a bit more contentious in the fact that it's a more selective institution. We can also point to this narrative that Bloom is portraying in that all Asian Americans are high achieving, and in a moment I'm going to go into depth about that. But in a sense, Bloom doesn't really have the best of intentions. He isn't doing this for Asian American benefit, but just to eliminate affirmative action in all. So, sorry, my bad. So, model minority myth. What is this? There's this idea that all Asians are high achieving, whether it be through academics or in the career force. They're also seen as submissive. They have to keep their head down when they're walking. You can easily push them around. They do whatever you say, but they're also very successful, regardless of the discrimination they have faced. The truth is, there are a few subgroups within the Asian group in general, considering that Asia is a huge place. There's a lot of people from Asia that are highly successful. A couple of these specific groups include Indians, Chinese people, Japanese people, and Indians. Lost my spot. Okay. Indians, Filipinos, Japanese, and Chinese Americans, they all tend to be way more successful. If anything, Indians have a median salary higher than Americans. This is because these few ethnicities have had access to elite education most times, and they get to come to the United States and get into those roles immediately, and then they earn a lot more money. But then we're also ignoring other Asian ethnicity groups, such as, where's my point? Sri Lankan Americans, or Bangladeshi Americans, Cambodian Americans, Vietnamese Americans, who tend to experience some of the worst poverty in the United States. And the reason why no one pays attention is this idea of the model minority myth, and in that they don't need help because they're Asian, because all Asians are successful. To tie this back to the SFFA case, they state that all Asians are high achieving, so discriminating against them makes no sense because they're so academically driven. They are a minority, so why are we being discriminated against? But at the same time, this effectively erases the struggles that lower income Asian students have to go through. They don't have access to the same educational resources. They don't have access to tutoring or prep. They also typically tend to deal with more mental health issues, and the fact that some of the prior listed ethnicities, specific Asian ethnicities, deal with mental health issues and the fact that they're refugees, so they have that added struggle as well. Also, the SFFA uses this prime example of an Asian student, an Asian boy who earns the perfect GPA, the perfect ACT, SAT score, has a colorful resume. It makes him the perfect candidate for Harvard, and he still gets rejected. That also effectively erases the fact that not every Asian student is like that. So, when I was looking into this case, as I just pointed out, there are some problems with this case in the fact that it doesn't make sense to lump all Asians into one group saying that they're all successful when that's truly not the case. Asians are a very diverse group, all with their own problems and all with their own history of discrimination. And the fact that Bloom doesn't necessarily have the best of intentions. Nonetheless, it's still an issue. How do Asians fit into this idea of affirmative action? Where do we belong? There's this idea that minorities are being pitted against minorities and that Asians are being seen as a new installation in the history of the United States in comparison to minorities. So the fact that, yes, Asians do face discrimination and oppression, but also there are other groups who have historically faced discrimination and oppression. But also, discrimination is discrimination, and what would we do? Do we keep traditional affirmative action in which Asian Americans may feel as though they're being ostracized for being Asian, or should we get rid of it and have a merit-based admissions policy, but then the underrepresented minorities that worked so hard to gain the seats which they have, they get significantly docked. Now, this is a very, very uncomfortable thing for me, and I didn't really have a stance until the very end where Carolyn and I were just duking it out and trying to figure out, like, where am I? And even still, I feel very uncomfortable about it, and I'm pretty sure maybe my stance will change, maybe it will not. But I can recognize that I come from a very privileged stance as an Asian American. I am an Indian Asian American, and my mother has an elite job. We had the resources to come here and have a better future. I attend Westover. I have so many privileges that are going for me. But at the same time, I'm discriminated in the fact that I am an Asian American. I am a first-generation American, so I have had to face the challenges of acclimating to the culture and becoming as American as I can be. And my mother is the sole breadwinner of the family, so she's sustaining our entire family and the fact that I am here. So I have a good mix of privileges and discrimination, and I feel as though affirmative action should help me as well. But at the same time, I also need to recognize my own privilege. Another idea is this idea of fair. What is fair to us? How should Asians be admitted? Just to point at a state that has gotten rid of affirmative action, California relatively recently eliminated that as an admissions policy, and because of that, the representation of Asians within certain huge institutions in California has skyrocketed. So just to take two for an example, UC Berkeley and the California Institute of Technology, otherwise known as Caltech, got rid of race-based admissions. Because of that, Caltech now has 27% Asians, and UC Berkeley has 38% Asians. Now, the SFFA would be like, yay, like, more Asian representation. But the fact that we don't know is that only 5.8% of the United States are Asian. So there's a gross overestimate of Asians within those institutions. Not to mention, this isn't really diversity. Having a minority become the majority in population doesn't mean that you're diverse, but rather now you have somewhat established a monoculture. And true diversity is having a bunch of different perspectives from a bunch of different identities. So, this idea of personal privilege and the fact that I can check that I have had the privilege of being able to apply to a bunch of different schools. So theoretically, if I'd gotten rejected from Harvard, which I didn't apply to Harvard, but if I did and I got rejected, that doesn't mean that that door is shut forever, because I got into a bunch of other good schools. But for some Asian Americans, that's not the case. They apply to a school, and if that door shuts, the door is completely shut, and they have no options. Furthermore, there is this idea of overrepresentation. How do we have this healthy balance between each minority and making sure that we can make a truly good educational institution and environment? That's the word. So, a few suggestions. One suggestion is to analyze Asians not as the entire group, but in subgroups. I feel as though this will allow for more equitable representation in the fact that a high-achieving Indian who comes from a family with both parents in elite jobs isn't being compared to a Cambodian American whose parents are working maybe 2 jobs a day, they deal with mental health issues, they're not getting access to the best educational resources. I feel as though each individual needs to be understood within their context and their own diversity and their own identifiers. Furthermore, there is this creation of a thing in upper institutions that you guys may know called legacy seats. Now, legacy seats have been called somewhat as the affirmative action for white people, in the fact that if you have a person or somebody in your family who has attended that institution and you say that in your application, you'll most likely have an easier chance at getting into that institution. And a lot of the time, the legacy students tend not to be as academically strong, but in an effort to have strong alumni connections or keep the institution afloat based off of financial needs, they tend to accept those students. Just as a statistic, in 1991, Harvard accepted 16% of the students from their regular pool. And now it's like 8%, so it's like, wow, I'd love to be in 1991, you know? But they accepted 16% of kids from their regular pool, but 35% from their legacy pool. This keeps institutions predominantly white, in that most likely people in the past who have attended those institutions tend to be white. So that's just a way to get more white people in. Furthermore, I would state that eliminating legacy seats allows for open and fair competition for all seats rather than a few seats that minority students have to struggle over. Within the context of Westover, I would like to state a couple things. I had a couple conversations with the admissions officers, and I was able to understand how Westover does their admissions process. And I did it like years ago, as in 4 years ago, so I don't really remember it. But when I was having conversations, I learned that the SSAT has a couple different essay prompts that kind of cover basically what I'm going to recommend, but I would recommend it, again, verbatim. That there's one essay directly from Westover, optional or not, that describes an obstacle that prospective students have faced and how they've overcame it. So not only will we be able to recognize a certain identifier or something that has caused substantial issues in their lives, but also how they overcame it to prove both that, yes, that student has had discrimination, but this is how they persevered and overcame it. Furthermore, I would recommend the creation of a diversity committee or some sort of standing committee that looks at both the diversity of the student body, but also the financial goals that need to be met, so that if need be, we can expand the socioeconomic groups which we look at, but also the diversity within each group. I would like to take a moment to thank a few people. I would like to thank the Raisin Center and Mary Taylor for bringing me out to SDLC and allowing me to connect with other Asian Americans and learn about this case to further spur my interest into looking at it. I would like to thank admissions for taking time out of their day to encourage me not only with this project, but also to discuss the practices at Westover and encouraging me to find ways to fix it. And to Carolyn, my advisor, for always helping me navigate my interests, create my research paper, which is 21 pages and will be due on the 30th. I need so much help. I have help though, it's Carolyn. And also guiding me not through just my writing, but also my thoughts surrounding this case. I have learned so much from you and I am so grateful. Question? Yes.
I just want to say thank you for presenting this. It's so rich. And I think you can take it into even deeper levels of international diversity versus domestic diversity, and then cultural, and then social economic. And you suggested labels within the Asian category. But where would labels stop? Because you can look even deeper into just deciphering how you're going to define diversity. But I feel like this is the conversations we need to have. And I really do appreciate your presentation. So I have no questions.
Yes.
I just am observing that you're really, redefining systemic sort of power structures in what you've examined here, and in terms of like your personal narrative and then the narrative of the selection process at these higher levels of education is very valuable, and I just really wanted to say how much I appreciate that. Yeah.
And also, I want to add to it that you must have started this project some time ago, because recently it came out that SAT, they're going to look at hardship within someone's culture. So it's interesting how you started this some time ago, and this is now coming. So that's very interesting.
Yes.
Do you know if there was any more updated data on the legacy seats since 1991, or is that like kept under wraps? The reason I'm curious about this is because of having obviously seen my own children going through like the process and having a lot of colleagues from all these other boarding schools I've been at and their children. Like we actually know of a family whose daughter didn't get into a college and both parents had gone there. So I'm sort of wondering, maybe are there some institutions that are already like recognizing that bias? That's what I would be interested in, as far as data, would there be something more current even?
In the specific journal that I had looked into the research for legacy seats and how that affects admission policies, this was the most recent one that I found, and I looked a lot and there weren't anything that was more current. I'm assuming that maybe they keep that information under wraps because that's a very touchy subject, and it's hard to figure out the reasons why people accept from legacy seats. Like I had some places saying that, oh, it's good to keep alumni relations, but others saying that you tend to get more financial contributions from those families. So it depends, like what kind of goal are you trying to achieve, and is that actually your goal, or is it something bigger?
Right.
If I could find more updated research, I probably would have loved to add it because that would change the narrative. but this is what I had.
Yeah, and that's why I bring it up, because like I said, having, just heard about, just within the last year or two of a couple cases like this, I am sort of wondering if that legacy seed piece, if there is a major shift in the last 5 to 10 years. That's what I'm kind of, but I mean, it is interesting that they're keeping it under wraps.
Yeah. But even in 1991, they were saying they accepted, 35% of legacy people? So it's not, it still wasn't the majority, it's just that they accepted more legacy people than others, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One final big round of applause for all 4 of our and hopefully we'll have more next year. A big thank you also to the advisors of these projects. They've gone above and beyond. So much appreciated, and thank you so much for coming.
All right.